We've talked about dreams under management, goals under management, and now it's time for humans under management. More specifically, the virtual Humans Under Management Conference happening on the 8th of September with incredible speakers from around the world. I'm thrilled to be part of this event for those seeking better client outcomes, which, as a listener of the Innovating Advice Show, I know includes you, and am impressed by how affordable this event is for advisors and planners everywhere. We're talking about the cost of a dinner. These super early bird tickets have sold out, but hop on now to grab an early bird ticket at innovatingadvice.com/HUM for Humans Under Management.
If I was to say, like, I never suffer from anxiety, and people can buy into that, because anxiety is a healthy mechanism. That's important to say as well. It's our brain telling ourselves there's a perceived danger, go careful. So we need that in our lives. When it gets out of control, that's the problem. So we need to show a little bit more of ourselves. That's probably, I'm going to repeat that so much, I'm going to stop now, I promise, Kate. But I'm so passionate about that. I really am. I think vulnerability, as I said, when practiced daily, that's our superpower. But it's the one thing that we're so scared of, showing the world our true self.
Welcome to episode 57 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Nick Elston, one of the highest profile and leading inspirational speakers on the lived experience of mental health. Nick shares tools, tips, and techniques on managing anxiety in life and business, and has a lot of experience working with financial services professionals. In this episode, Nick and I are chatting about the masks we wear, whether we realize it or not, how to evolve company culture around anxiety, stress, and mental health, and how vulnerable leadership and advisors should be with their employees and clients. We also discuss generational differences in managing anxiety, the importance of self-care and looking out for others, and Nick shares what emotional storytelling is and why it's a great tool both personally and professionally. Links, show notes, and timestamps at innovatingadvice.com or directly through the link below. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Nick, let's just dive in and get into a little bit of your story. So what led you to becoming an international speaker on anxiety, mental health, and well-being?
Who'd think it? So my angle is lived experience. So for me, lived experience is two things. Firstly, it explains my background. Secondly, for me, it's the vehicle that takes individuals and organizations from the challenges of mental health to the solution, but I'm not the solution. So my sole role is to increase engagement in the wellbeing and mental health initiatives that people have in place already. How I do that is by sharing the story of why I'm here. And what you've just asked me is that I actually came to speak through, I had a childhood of mental illness, and into my teen and adult life, it morphed into something which was around high anxiety called generalized anxiety disorder. That kind of culminated in a breakdown, kind of meltdown moment, whatever you want to call that. Different people have got different names of things. And for me, speaking became initially my therapy. And then I found a new tribe, and I found that it was a real cause, a real passion. And fast forward to today, it's what I do for a job. It's kind of nuts, but that's the way it's worked out. I've always kind of said, like, the best things in my life have happened by accident, and the things that I thought were going to be brilliant, absolutely bombed.
Yeah. And that's, talking with financial planners, the listeners on the show were so trained to, hey, we're going to create a plan for what life looks like. But Nick, that's a great example of, you just don't know. And sometimes the best laid plans, the best intentions go out the window and life takes you in a different direction.
It's very true. And do you know what I think is, I've got this thing around vulnerability to bulletproof. When we start to practice vulnerability on a daily basis, when we start to let our stuff out there, we become bulletproof. Firstly, no one has anything over us for a start, but also all of our stuff is there. It encourages people to be authentic and vulnerable back, which means we have a deeper connection with people. And especially in the financial services industry, one of the many industries I work with, it's not exclusively financial services I work with, but there's a real problem that actually we need to encourage vulnerability behind the professional facade, because actually it's a masking technique, and one that I used for a long time. And I think the reason why we use that is because we're so afraid of people seeing us. We're so afraid of we try and be what people want to see in us. We try and be what situations demand of us, but we sure don't damn show ourselves, because when we show ourselves, our narrative tells us we're going to be shot at. Our narrative tells us we're going to be unloved or dismissed or judged, and that's the reason why we don't show ourselves. But actually, speaking as somebody who's used that mechanism to come back from mental illness and also mental health, if you really want to have that depth with people in any interaction, then show a little bit of yourself.
And that can be easier said than done, especially, I mean, I know you work in multiple industries, you do a lot of work with financial services. So, I mean, I anticipate you've seen the challenge of how much of it still is the old boys club, and being younger or being a woman of any age or a person of color. It can be hard still today to feel like you can be vulnerable and take that mask off.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's interesting, and I enjoyed our conversation before about that I only see the challenges that are before me. So I learn from other people and their experiences. And like you said, in terms of diversity and in terms of inclusion, there's definitely an element of that. In terms of men, it's kind of like that man up, stiff upper lip brigade. We've got brought up on that conditioning that we don't talk about our stuff. And we kind of wonder why there's a tidal wave of this stuff going on now. It's because the dam has burst. And I think that there's that element. But also, we were talking about kind of women and women of color around speaking as well. And that's a form of vulnerability, to be able to stand up, to be able to, even in front of one person or 10,000 people, however many people that may be, to put yourself out there. That is vulnerability. And when I speak at events worldwide, then actually 80% are male at the level where I'm speaking alongside people. Actually, in more so in financial services and accountancy and other industry that I speak in as well, it's definitely a lot more skewed that way. However, when I run my speaking academies, when I help people with speaking coaching, the 80% are female. So for me, there's the kind of the difference, really. I think that yes, it's a huge topic to cover in a very short space of time, but let's give it a little go. So for me, I think it's the case of men have traditionally been allowed to mess up and have been forgiven. And I think that in terms of women stepping up to speak, that there's an air of perfectionism, because actually when they've stepped up to share an opinion, that actually there's a higher chance that could be at very best critiqued, but also maybe even shot at in that kind of sense. I think there's somewhere in the middle where actually that men need to kind of have some more of that perfectionism to get better, and to have that kind of more maybe compassion in what they're talking about, what they're delivering. And I think that in terms of women, less perfectionism, being prepared to open up a lot more. But actually, that's where the truth is going to be, somewhere in the middle. And I think that the sooner that happens and the more often that happens, that those boundaries will break down. And I think that's happening. I genuinely think that's happening. But it is interesting to see that the desire is there for, in this example, women to speak. But why is that not transferring through to the end? So I guess I see things from both sides on that front.
Well, and whether we're talking about speaking or we're talking about being in a leadership role or in a client-facing role, I mean, you can take that position and kind of apply it to any number of areas within financial services. That's something we're still seeing over and over again, is the men being out there and present more, even though the women want to do it. And just thinking about the effects of that on people that, you know, have long struggled with, or maybe have a newfound, I want to say, like, relationship with anxiety, mental health, and trying to maintain well-being. When you're going into these companies and having these conversations, and like you said, you're about engagement, not solution, how are you helping them to engage in changing that conversation and that culture?
So for me, I think it's a case of it's giving people a safe and non-judgmental environment to just open their minds to how the information I'm sharing, the story that I'm sharing, relates to them. So throughout the course of my keynote talk, which is called Talking Anxiety, I cover maybe only 15 minutes of my story. And most of the section is around tools and tips on managing anxiety in life and in business. And because I do cover that whole, I guess, that whole gambit of personal and professional issues within that, I know people that have seen it maybe 3 or 4 times, of each time something else has kind of really resonated with them because that was their current challenge at the time. So for me, I'm just basically encouraging people to question things. I believe we have all the answers we'll ever need. We just don't ask ourselves the right questions. Now, again, this is such a deep subject to go into for a few minutes, but the reason why we don't give ourselves the truth, a lot of the time it's because we don't question our conditioning. We don't question why we react in a certain way. But also sometimes we can be afraid of the truth. One of the exercises that I encourage people to do is to question everything that you say and everything that you do for 24 hours. And it's a tiring process. But so when you wake up tomorrow morning, you wake up at 6 o'clock. Why do you wake up at 6 o'clock? Could you do it more sleep or less sleep? Or is it because you've always done it that way? Why do you wake up next to them? Maybe is a question you haven't asked in a while. And I got to throw that one in because it's a great example of one of the questions we can ring fence. We turn it into something which is just a pure belief. It's unquestionable. Now, for me, I believe everything about us should be open to our own questioning. And it's only then can we realize that we do have all the answers. We just need to ask ourselves the right questions. And in terms of our narrative really reinforces the way that we feel. And I think that's the reason why people that struggle with anxiety, people that may have low self-esteem, low self-confidence, can talk themselves down further into that conditioning as well. So for me, it's kind of distinguishing the difference between mental illness, which is absolutely needs to be medically treated, and mental health, which we all have. And actually, like every form of health, that needs to be exercised and pointed in the right direction, and actually set some goals around that. So for me, it's about marginal gains. It's about daily incremental changes. What can we do every single day to make ourselves feel a little bit happier, a little bit stronger, and a little bit fitter so that we can go again strong tomorrow?
So, Nick, you mentioned earlier kind of that whole idea of man up. And as you're talking, and I'm picturing you, talking with a company and being in a business and something that's been very traditional for a very long time. I was watching a sitcom the other day that had, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 generations of people. And the grandfather was right in that like man up phase. And he was like, we don't talk about emotions, like you're, stalwart and you just get stuff done. So how do you balance generational differences in terms of talking about and dealing with mental health?
It's really interesting. I think it's because they feel that they don't have the permission to talk about these things. When I've spoken to older generations, whether that be through things like Rotary clubs, especially initially when I was doing a lot of talks to social groups, actually the most engagement I was getting were from the older groups, because they just felt they had permission to start to poke and prod and ask themselves some questions they've never asked. And these are people that have lived through wars. These are people that have gone through like the world's greatest challenges, and actually have never gone anywhere with all of that. And it's really interesting. The biggest kind of challenge that older generations have shared is the fact that most of their regret comes from lost love. So they will still be carrying that kind of that emotion decades later about that one that got away. So it just goes to show that they are absolutely human. It's not cut off completely. It just means that they don't feel they've ever had the permission to share. So again, I've been described as brutally honest. That's intentional. I'm brutally honest about my own experiences, so people can be brutally honest back to me about their stuff. As I said, it's when you show vulnerability, people do have that immediate bridge of trust to what you are about. And the fact I've got no agenda, I've got no solution, encourages that even more. And people will tell things to me that they haven't told to their GP, they haven't told to their psychologist, because they just feel safe in that. And then obviously what I do with that morally and responsibly is to actively signpost either back into the organization's employee assistance programs or counseling services, or maybe externally to mental health organizations that I partner with as well.
So are these deep conversations happening in a group setting, or are they opening up to you one-on-one?
So open questions are very few and far between, given the sensitivity of the topic. So most of the questions and the conversations that I have are one-to-one. And again, even in a professional corporate environment, so again, financial services is a great example. If I'm getting brought in to deliver a talk to I don't know, 500 financial services employees. I will deliver my talk, and you would see the partners, the principals, like with their arms folded right at the end, thinking, it's not the fact they're not engaging. I'm not showing them I'm engaging with this. I want them to know that I'm absolutely okay. But the first people that talk to me afterwards are those people. And that's the thing, we can never assume. We can never assume that somebody hasn't got challenges just because they're not talking about it, just because they want to keep that kind of facade on it. For me, it's those people with the crossed arms I know that I'm going to be talking to first afterwards. So when I go to get my coffee afterwards, they will sidle up to me and say, you know what you said about this?
Yeah.
And I love that. Because actually it means that in an hour, I've built enough trust for somebody who hasn't spoken for decades to be able to open up to me in a very small way, at least initially.
That's wonderful. And then thinking about it in terms of the organization going forward and talking about being vulnerable, what do you kind of see as a good balance between, let's say leadership and employees in terms of how vulnerable should they be? Or, some organizations are like, nope, leadership needs to be like that grandpa of, stay strong and don't show vulnerability to your staff or your employees.
I think it's a great question, Kate, and it's one of those things that, for me, there's never going to be too much vulnerability. For me, I mean, I appreciate I'm the extreme of this now because I live this stuff. We've got situations, obviously, at the moment with lockdown and people coming back off of furlough, people that are coming back into employment or maybe even leaving employment. There's a lot of kind of awkward conversations to have. There's a lot of leadership challenges, both positive and negative. And for me, it's keeping it human. I think the traditional approach in corporate life, especially, has been to take the broad brush approach. Right, this is going to be the thing to fix everybody, and then we're going to be okay. And for me, right now, it needs to be human to human. And actually, the way that we do that is to show a little bit of ourselves. It doesn't change our leadership style. It doesn't mean to say that we need to leave ourselves open to kind of litigation or anything. It just means that we just need to give them a little bit to get a little bit back. And I think then you can start to have that conversation. I genuinely feel that if you have a leader that's constantly positive, appears flawless, that is harder to buy into those types of people. And even on the kind of the speaking world, you see the people that actually kind of like, they kind of like seem to exude thing. They have no challenges, no problems whatsoever. I find that harder to buy into than somebody will stand up and say, you know what, I'm actually pretty anxious right now, but I'm going to be okay in a minute. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? It's kind of, maybe that's me, but I appreciate I love the human element of interaction. And that's whether it's in those awkward conversations, whether that's in leadership. I'd much rather see people, which is why on LinkedIn and through kind of emails and things that I send out to my base, that I will actually share the ups and the downs. I think it's important for people to see the downs, because actually I don't want people to think it's like, hallelujah, he's cured. Absolutely not. I manage my stuff daily. Thank you very much. And I think giving people that insight means that gives them a little bit of hope, actually, that if he can manage it daily and I can manage it daily.
Yes.
If I was to say, like, I never suffer from anxiety, and people can buy into that, because anxiety is a healthy mechanism. That's important to say as well. It's our brain telling ourselves there's a perceived danger, go careful. So we need that in our lives. But when it gets out of control, that's the problem. So we need to show a little bit more of ourselves. That's probably, I'm going to repeat that so much, I'm going to stop now, I promise, Kate. But I'm so passionate about that. I really am. I think vulnerability, as I said, when practiced daily, that's our superpower. But it's the one thing that we're so scared of, showing the world our true self.
Yes. And I'll repeat that again as well, just the importance of vulnerability and being human. And Nick, you said so many things in there that I want to touch on, starting with thinking about how challenging this time is with this continued pandemic and lockdown and uncertainty. And we were chatting before about, I noticed I'm struggling, I think, again, because I'm not sleeping well. And, even when you don't necessarily outwardly feel quote unquote anxious, or I think it looks different in different people. We're in this strange time. And I keep reading about how much this pandemic is affecting people on a subconscious level, and that it's manifesting itself in different ways. So knowing that employees are not together, you don't have your colleagues around, people are at home in all sorts of different situations. How can colleagues look after each other during this time?
I mean, that's a really interesting topic. That for me, actually, it's that underlying dread, that underlying anxiety that does go off the radar. That's the thing that's taken our energy. That's the thing that's kind of stealing our attention. And I think that's the reason why, like you, I was at that place 3 weeks ago. But it just became too much. I was too overwhelmed. And I'm speaking as an introvert. Weirdly, I'm an introvert. I recharge in my own company. So actually, up until that point, I'd done pretty much okay. I was quite happy with how things were, if I'm being honest with you. And interestingly, what I found is that people that have had mental health challenges before have been able to manage this a lot more effectively than people that haven't. So they have the processes to manage their state more effectively, pretty much on tap through their own recovery mechanisms. And actually, it's the people that have not been used to loneliness or stress or isolation or anxiety, that those are the people that have started to really kind of struggle. And I think that's part of where we are right now. I think coming away from this point is going to be a lot more challenging than getting to this point, because you have a whole mixture of things. The whole separated working, again, I could probably split right down the middle. People that have told me that they don't want things to go back to normal, and people that can't wait to go back to the office.
Yes.
So again, along that line, there's no fix-all. It's exactly the same thing. I think we need to just have those human conversations to see how people are doing. And of course, the things like checking in on people, that's kind of like a given, I guess. But for me, it's just making sure that we keep communication open by any way that we can. And just making sure that we check in on people, making sure that we don't get defined by those negative things that could happen along the way. It'd be very easy to be overwhelmed by something actually that you would usually take in your stride right now. That could really affect you, because a lot of people are acting from a position of fear. And again, we touched on this before we came on air, that to start with, there was months of a groundswell of compassion as this was really gripping its hold. And I think, given big world events recently, that there's just been a real run through of toxicity. And I think that's the reason why I left Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I just cut it off overnight, because actually it was overriding my self-care processes to the extent where I was feeling great and I started scrolling and I felt worse. And I thought, I actually just don't need that right now. And I think the challenge is right now, whether it's just us or looking after a group of people, maybe even clients, is that knowing that we are all bigger picture players, especially in the professional world, that we are all starting with the end in mind, and we can't do that. And I think that's the thing that's really crippling us, is the fact that we cannot assume an outcome, because if the world's greatest minds don't know what's going on and when it's going to end, who are we to take a stab at that? All we truly have is today, and how we choose to proactively go into each and every day. The problem we have is when we struggle with low self-esteem, with low self-confidence, with mental health challenges, the first thing we sacrifice is choice. So we give away the one thing that we have true ownership over. We give that to other people. We give our happiness to other people, because we don't have the courage and confidence and conviction in ourselves to keep ownership of that. So I guess that's the reason why, even when there was no work coming in, I just kept going, because for me, I need people to know that. I need people to know that actually we have a choice. We cannot control the uncontrollable. And actually the pursuit of trying to do so will create extra anxiety. So all we have is how we proactively choose to go into every day. So don't ever give up that element of choice.
So what about those days where there's just too much going on and you didn't sleep well and you've got, I don't have kids, but I hear from friends, kids crying and they're running around, and you've got a spouse that's also working from home, and, there's too much. How can you comfortably communicate to colleagues that you need some time?
I think that there's two things here. I think for me, firstly, it's having to make sure that your self-care routine is firmly in place, even on the days where you feel good. So for me, that would involve having a process where I get up at a set time of day and I go to sleep at a set time of day. And that will regulate my sleeping. It's the first thing that I changed over lockdown. And that's really helped. I will go for maybe a 5-6 mile walk in the morning, and come back, have breakfast, shower, and then I'm fit for the day, and incorporated more things like that. So even when I was feeling good, I was still doing those things. I introduced meditation. I introduced lots of things, affirmations, and lots of things that really form part of a real high performing day now. So actually what I found is, on days where I didn't feel life, I actually use those same techniques to think, okay, well, I'm not going to do life today, and I'll just show some compassion to myself. And I think that, again, it's another vulnerability piece. I know I'm going to keep coming back to this, but it's another vulnerability piece. Actually, not being afraid to say to people, actually, I just need to take a step back. Or if you are in a busy household and you're still in lockdown or a version of, having the courage, and it is courage a lot of the time, to say, sorry, I need my own space, just 30 minutes just to do my own thing. That kind of sanity check that we all need, just to do our own stuff. And then we can go again strong tomorrow. Because for me, and I think especially as somebody who's experienced breakdown, is that I know that we can only run for so long before we stop. So I can start to feel that when that starts to come on. Not everyone has that. And that is, again, it becomes a superpower. That a lot of people that haven't been through that will actually get to that point without even knowing that they're there. So being open, keeping those lines of communication, having a great daily self-care routine, I think all of those things line you up to give you the best chances to have a successful day by your own definition of the word success.
Yeah, I like that. All right, Nick, so you've mentioned vulnerability a couple of times so far, and you've also touched on...
I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. And I want to just kind of take that to the next level of, we've been talking about sort of with colleagues and maybe in our personal lives, but what about, what do you recommend, if you have recommendations on how vulnerable someone in financial services should be with their clients?
Okay, so vulnerability there's a softer way of doing this, and we've all done it, really. I mean, my job, my career before doing this, I worked in sales and account management, so I was client facing. And that my definition of vulnerability then, I didn't label it as vulnerability. So for me, vulnerability was actually something as simple as sharing your likes, sharing where you're going on holiday, sharing your family's name. It's still vulnerability because you're just sharing a little bit more of your personal self. I think for me, if you have a great example is if you have a client who may be struggling right now, that there's two things you can do. You wouldn't be surprised to know the second thing is vulnerability. The first one is to manage expectations, especially right now, is to manage their expectations of what they can expect from you and what they can't expect from you. But if you need to get them to open up about a certain thing, if we need to kind of really enhance that personal relationship, maybe start to share something that's kind of stressed you out recently or concern that you've had, something that relates to them and their business. And actually then what you'll find is that they'll actually, yeah, I get that. Because a lot of the time that they, especially around, I do a lot of work with financial well-being from a lived experience perspective, that a lot of the time the reason why people come to a financial services person is because money and tax and everything else is a huge anxiety trigger. And if you throw in the pandemic, if you throw in the fact that maybe the sales have turned off, if you throw in the fact that mortgages have to be paid and tax bills have to be paid, lots of different things, that actually they're coming to you in a position of fear. But they feel that they can't tell you that because you're a trusted advisor. So by giving a little bit of yourself, actually you start to connect on a human level. And the great thing is that people that are truly good at this, the people that are doing this right now, that are building relationships that are going to be set for life. They're set in stone because they trust you. They've built that trust in you. So our responsibility is, if somebody is vulnerable to us, is to actually trust that, to respect that and show compassion, and just maybe give a little bit of yourself back.
Yes. And like you, I'm talking with lots of advisors and seeing, those are the ones that are growing right now, the ones that are a bit more vulnerable and sharing their story. And, I've talked with lots of advisors that are like, hey, I need to take a couple of days off or a week off and have a staycation, just get away from work, and recognizing some of those triggers within themselves versus, as I'm talking with people that really are just sales. And hey, all I do is kind of sell products. They're really struggling right now because they're not in it to create that human connection and have vulnerability and build that trust. And that's what everyone needs always. But I think we're seeing it definitely be more important now.
It is, and it takes away the depth of any relationship, of any interaction. It's a very 2D experience from your client's perspective as well. And let's be honest, I mean, like I said, myself and you, the reason why we've connected so well so quickly is because actually we both share stuff right from the first minute I spoke to you to the second call and into today. And that's the reason why. And I think that it builds such a bond and there's a lot of trust built very, very quickly. And actually it's something that if you were very superficial, it may be built, but it'll be built over a period of months, maybe years, not 3 calls kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. And you, I mean, you reached out to me and you even used those words like, let's connect on a human level. And I was like, yes, I love this, because going back to the masks that we all wear and being, well, I used to be a young woman. I feel like I feel like I've surpassed that. But, being a young woman in this industry, I have definitely felt like I'm wearing a mask on multiple occasions and feeling like I have to be a certain persona to be in certain rooms. And it's exhausting, and
Imagine.
it doesn't feel, so much of it doesn't feel real. It feels like we're all in this play, and not just me. Looking around the room so often, I always wonder, I'm like, who's the human behind this suit or this facade or whatever it is? And we don't share that with each other enough.
It's very true. And I think also the challenge that you have is that you're kind of, as a woman in financial services and at these events, not only do you feel the pressure yourself, but you kind of automatically assume that you're flying the flag for the cause as well, which
Yep.
compounds it a whole load more pressure on top of that as well. But you're quite right. And actually, let's be honest, I know it sounds a kind of bit like the Matrix right now, but it can be a little bit like that actually until we have those interactions, it's just something that's playing around us. When I go to London, when I've been to Washington and spoken to people on the tube and stuff, they're going to really get freaked out when somebody's saying good morning. Morning.
Yes.
Oh, whoa, we got a live one here. And it's really, really strange, but it's something I like to do because it actually just makes me realize that actually this is all real. This is not just stuff that's happening around me.
Yeah, definitely. So knowing that everyone kind of manages anxiety differently, for those that might be experiencing some of it for the first time, maybe not even recognizing that that's what's happening, what would you recommend, A, that they look out for those people that it might be the first time, and B, how to manage it?
Okay, so for me, I think it's a case of, I'm not sure if it's being used your side of the pond, but here we've been saying we're all in this together,
Yep.
and actually we're not, really not. We're in the same storm. We're in different boats, and what I mean by that is the fact that we all have different perspectives, different challenges, and I think that, for example, I did a keynote talk for the NHS Frontline Conference. Obviously, a whole different set of challenges to elderly people that have been in isolation for most of the year, but actually just as relevant, just as frustrating, just as painful. So for me, if somebody who's new to this that could be looking around for solutions, then the challenge is that there's no fix all for everybody or anybody, that we are all different. We all get affected by different things. For me, it's about reading loads, listening to loads, watching loads, building your playbook. So if you read one book and one line jumps out at you, put that one line in your playbook. And you start to build a kind of a blueprint which is good and tailored for you. I think it's also recognizing that essentially in life, people just want to be heard and they want to be understood. And I think that right now, people don't feel that way. They don't genuinely feel that they're being heard. So it could be you, but also could be somebody that comes to you. Then we have a responsibility not to fix people. Unless you're a medical professional, they're not coming to you to be fixed. They just want you to listen, and then they'll find their own way forward. So if somebody comes to you, put the phone down, put the laptop away, genuinely listen. And I think our only responsibility to be a decent human being is to get very good at active signposting, knowing the organizations that can support people, knowing some trusted providers or solution providers that you can help by guiding them on their way. And that takes away the burden of, especially in a management or leadership role, that who looks after the people that looks after people. It's that kind of thing where the real challenge right now is that if you're responsible for a group of clients, a group of employees, a team, then you can very easily take on that burden of everybody else, plus your own stuff. So actually your means your self-protection needs to be amplified times 20, times 50, times 100, depending on your team size. And that's near on impossible. So I think for me, it's just getting very good at active signposting is a really good step along the way.
And what exactly does that mean?
So what does it mean? So when I work with clients, I get to find out as part of the kind of fact find up front, what counselling services they have internally, employee assistance programs, so access to treatment. It could be mental health initiatives. mental health first aiders, lots of different things that companies and organizations will lay on for teams and people. But actually, the engagement is typically low because actually it feels like a classroom environment. It feels like a fix, and people are really, really kind of anxious about approaching that. So for me, I engage by getting the audience to open up, getting the audience to have those conversations, have those thoughts. Then I increase the engagement, sometimes even by 90% by one talk, that people feel safe enough to engage. So active signposting could be that, but also externally, the charities and the organizations that provide mental health services. It could be that you could find, I know here we have Mind, who have an urgent help button on a website that actually will direct people to urgent help if they really at a point of crisis. Just knowing that means that I have that in the toolbox to be able to help people. So for me, that's what active signposting is knowing the solutions, knowing where to send people, but then most importantly, knowing how you engage them and get them to engage with that service.
Yeah, and that would be a great thing for financial services professionals to have, because like you said, it's not their role either to be the solution. No. It's good to have that engagement, but yeah, saying, hey, here's some place that you might want to try. Here's a resource, here's a book, here's a website or call center.
Yeah. I think that's the challenge. I think, especially in financial services, you are constantly trying to sort the symptom, not the problem. The problem happens before it gets to you, and I think that's the challenge. Is trying to get to the root of the problem, which can only be done for deep connection with people. It's getting to the root of the problem before it reaches the point that they're coming to you in a state of panic or a state of anxiety. So we're constantly trying to fix symptoms to things, and I think we need to dig a little bit deeper.
Yep. So Nick, the last thing I want to touch on, because I find it pretty fascinating, is you talk about emotional storytelling and how to tell a story through you instead of from you.
It's easier said than done, and I speak personally on that one as well. So as you can tell, I get very passionate about this stuff. So if I go and deliver a keynote, even in a kind of a training room environment, not just a stage environment, if I deliver a keynote, then I can basically give it everything I've got and feel absolutely drained at the end of it. So for me, emotional storytelling is the practice of being able to convey emotion with power and clarity. So how do you sound if you are delivering sadness, for example? So the 3 exercises that I run as part of my Speaking Academy days, delivering sadness, delivering anger, and delivering love. How do we sound when we deliver each of those things? And for me, it's kind of like you're building the foundations of a keynote, really. But for the audience to really leave on a high, you need to take them low. And the personal story element is this, that I will take them low very, very early, but never leave them there. So how can we convey that emotion without having to relive that yourself over and over again? So for me, it's about, and without changing without making the message disingenuous, without changing the authenticity of what you're delivering, is getting good at delivering emotion. So sadness is very kind of much more slower pace, softer tone, the use of silence. And then we go into anger, which is like, just like rage and anger and very sharp and short. And then we go into love, where you're just kind of smiling, and even on the phones, people can hear you smiling. So you kind of, it's going through all those kind of range of emotions, because we don't do that. We don't actually, we try the hardest exercise of the day. It's right, I want you to talk about something that you hate. People don't like that at all, because they're not used to that. They feel so reserved that they don't feel like that. So when you give them that space, I've heard everything. You'll be amazed at what things really annoy people. But yeah, so emotional storytelling for me has an ultimate effect on our success by our own definition. Because if we are unable to deliver a message, whether that be one person, whether it's 10,000 people, with clarity and power and emotion, that has a real crippling effect on how far we can go in our chosen field, how far we can go in terms of the depth of our relationships. And it's interesting, a lot of the people that come to those Speaking Academy days are not just people that want to be stage speakers, not just because they want to represent their business or lead a team, sometimes because they don't feel that they're being heard at home, that actually their personal relationships are really struggling because they haven't got the confidence to actually put across their point of view. So it's amazing why people come to the event, but emotional storytelling is the overriding hook of that. So I hope that makes sense.
That's fascinating. And I'm certain there are people listening that would love to take part in that. And I anticipate, is that something they can do virtually?
Yes, it's being run monthly, virtually now. And yes, would love to see everybody come along. That'd be great.
Good. Well,
Maybe
I
not
have
everybody in
linked.
one go. That'd be a
Right.
huge room. Be a lot of hate in one room.
Yeah, that might be a little intense. So, Nick, I have linked to that. I've linked to your speaker page. Like we've mentioned, you go in and talk with a lot of financial services companies. And Nick, so want to appreciate you for your vulnerability, for how you are helping bring out vulnerability in others, for your willingness and desire and passion around being human and encouraging everyone else to be human. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everything you shared. Any final thoughts?
Thank you, Kate. Yes, I will. Big country music fan. Love the
Yes.
US. Big country music fan. And for me, tracked by Gary Allan, as every storm runs out of rain. I always try and use quotes from country songs in my talks, ones that are not about losing your dog or your missus or something. But every storm runs out of rain. I think right now people need to know that. And I think for me, we don't know when this storm is going to pass, but if you think back that every storm you've been through has passed, you've at least survived it because you're here. Most of the time we thrive through it. Most of the time we've learned. Most of the time we come through smarter and happier. We just don't see it at the time. So every storm will run out of rain. And if somebody comes to you, just remember they're coming to you to be heard and truly listened to. And that's it. You don't need the responsibility to try and fix everybody.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder. We don't have to be the solution or have the solution.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you so much,
Kate.
Nick. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and shoot me a thought or two. Link to my profile is right below. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to hearing from you.